So Liz and I are with Housing Innovations, and Housing Innovations is the training and consulting firm that provides staffing support for the Connecticut Balance of State Continuum of Care. And our session this morning is about the CT BOSS, Connecticut Balance of State Continuum of Care grievance policy that is used by folks who are dissatisfied with the services that they are getting or who were denied services. So we're not going to be talking this morning about the process we use for provider grievances, which we typically receive in relation to renewal evaluation scores or can also be on other matters. But as always, if you have questions that are specific to the provider grievance process, then feel free to reach out to Liz and I or anyone else on our team at any time, and we can make sure we get those questions answered as well. So before we start, just a couple quick housekeeping things. So we are scheduled to be together today until 11 a.m. We've only got about 11 slides for you this morning, so I think we'll probably finish before 11 a.m. Depending upon how many questions you all have for us. So as Liz said, the webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to the CT BOSS website, which is www.ctbos.org. We invite everyone. I see a lot of you already have your cameras on. Thank you. We appreciate being able to see everyone, and it's a nice opportunity for you all to be able to see each other. If you haven't already turned your camera on, we definitely invite you to do that, but we definitely understand if that's not going to work for you this morning. So we want to make sure that all of your questions get answered. So if at any point you have questions, you can either raise your hand in Zoom, you can just unmute yourself and speak up, or you can put your questions into the chat box, and Liz is going to be monitoring the chat box through the course of the webinar this morning, and we'll make sure we get those answered. So I will try to be super mindful that some of you may be new to the continuum of care, and I'll try to avoid speaking HUD-ese. But if at any time I say something that's unclear or I accidentally lapse into alphabet soup and I don't explain acronyms, then please, please, please stop me and let me know, and I will explain. So, all right, bear with me while I advance the slides here. There we go. So, so this is our agenda for today. Our goal is really to make sure that you all, I think most of you are probably from nonprofit provider agencies that get some sort of funding through CT BOSS. Our goal is to make sure that you understand what the CT BOSS grievance process is, who can use that process, what the steps in the process are, and how those steps are a little different depending upon the type of assistance that someone is getting or was denied. And then, as always, to make sure that you know how to get your questions answered, as well as you know what your obligations are to help make sure that the folks that you are serving understand their rights under the grievance policy. So, CT BOSS originally introduced the grievance policy, I think it was in 2019. The policy for participants, for folks who get services, was originally introduced around 2019, and that policy was recently amended by the steering committee in January of this year. So, it's super important that everyone who gets or is seeking services from projects in CT BOSS knows that they have the right to grieve, and that we as a COC have a policy that is clear, right? It's got steps that are transparently outlined, and so is predictable for folks to understand what those steps are, how quickly they can hear back, et cetera. That the process is fair and gets things resolved promptly, and that really we are encouraging people to raise any concerns they have, and making sure that they understand that they can do that without having to worry about retaliation. So we also hope that having this type of grievance process helps to get things resolved quickly and in the most amicable way possible, and prevents more serious disputes, right? If we can get something resolved through the grievance process, then the hope that, for example, it doesn't escalate into a legal process that can be even more time consuming and costly and difficult for everyone. And then we definitely see our team at Housing Innovations learns a ton every time we get grievances, whether those grievances are from people who are receiving services or from you all, the providers who receive funding. So we really see the grievance process as part of our continuous quality improvement strategy. So like I said, every time we get a grievance, we learn something, and then often the grievance committee will make recommendations to the steering committee for changes in our policies and practices. So I just said that the policy was amended in January by the steering committee, and that was really the result of some learning that happened through a grievance that we received. So we really do take grievances seriously and see them not as a negative thing at all, but rather as an opportunity to really tighten our services and our practices as a COC. So in CT Boss, we fund a bunch of different kinds of projects. Most of our projects are permanent supportive housing projects. We also fund rapid rehousing projects. And then we have a small number of other types of projects, right? So we have transitional housing projects. We have one joint transitional rapid rehousing project. We provide funding for our coordinated access networks. And then we've got some youth-specific projects through the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program. So that's youth crisis housing, diversion and rapid exit, and then youth navigation. So depending upon what kind of project someone is getting help from, determines a little bit which process they follow. So I'm going to start by talking about the main CT Boss grievance policy. And that policy applies to most of our project types. And then after we talk about that, then I'll talk about some differences across the different project types. So people who have a concern with either assistance that they have already begun to receive or assistance that they were denied from most of the project types funded by CT Boss would follow the standard CT Boss grievance policy. The CT Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, or DEMAS, has a different process, and so we'll talk about that in a minute. But most people who want to register a grievance would do it through the standard CT Boss grievance process, and that includes people who have a problem with some kind of assistance they got through the CAN. So what are the steps in the standard CT Boss grievance process? So the first step is that we, whenever we get a grievance, right, our goal is to try to get that resolved as quickly as possible. So when we get a grievance, the first thing we're going to do is to have a conversation with the person who's filing the grievance and try to see if we can just resolve the issue without going any further, right? So that's always going to be the first thing that we do. If we're unsuccessful at doing that, then we will process the grievance through our grievance policy. So, and the first step in the grievance policy is that the person is going to be required, if they haven't already done so, to file a grievance with your agency, right? So if somebody, for example, is, I'm just going to make something up, is a participant in a youth crisis housing project that's run by CHR, they would file a grievance through the CHR, that agency's CHR's grievance policy. Now, that does not apply if the grievance is related to a CAN. So someone can file a grievance directly with CT Boss about a CAN matter. But usually, most of the people we serve are going to be connected already to some kind of nonprofit agency, and they would first file their grievance through the grievance policy of that agency. Once they've done that, if they still have concerns, right, they're not satisfied with the outcome of that process, then they would file a grievance with CT Boss, and the email address and the phone number that they could use to do that are on this slide. Now, that's got to be done under our policy within 90 days of them getting the written notice from the agency, the nonprofit agency that they're getting services from, of the outcome of the grievance that they filed under that agency's grievance procedure. So once we get that grievance, right, as I said, we'll try to work with the case manager, work with the client to get it resolved. If we're not able to do that, then we would take it to the grievance committee, and the grievance committee for CT Boss is going to be at least 3 people. Those folks are appointed by the Connecticut Balance of State Steering Committee co-chairs. And we always try to ensure that at least one of the 3 is a person with lived experience of homelessness. The committee will meet within 30 days of when we get the grievance, and the grievances that we have gotten, and we haven't gotten many, but we do get them occasionally. But the grievances that we have gotten have all been things that are very time sensitive and that are putting the person at imminent risk of losing their housing and returning to homelessness, unfortunately. So we definitely understand that that's an urgent situation. And so even though the policy says that the committee will meet within 30 days of receiving the grievance, we actually have been able to move grievances forward much more quickly than that. And that will always be our goal, to get it resolved as quickly as possible. So the person who filed the grievance has the right to be present at the grievance committee meeting. They also have the right to bring with them an attorney or another advocate. If they don't have an attorney or another advocate and they would like one, our team will certainly help to connect them to someone who can advocate on their behalf. And then they will get a written decision from the grievance committee within 10 days of that grievance committee meeting. And again, because of the time sensitive nature often of these issues, the committee, really tries to make that happen even more quickly than the 10 days. So when they get that notice from the grievance committee, it will inform them of their right to appeal. If they are dissatisfied with the decision of the grievance committee, they have the right to appeal for a final review by the CT Boss co-chairs, and that's the 3rd step here on our slide. And it's the same email and phone number that they would use for step number 2, is how they would request a final review by the chairs. And that's got to be done within 15 days of receiving the written notice from the grievance committee about the outcome under step number 2. Now, all of this, all the details that I just said, everything that's here on this slide, all of this is in writing, and it's in the CT Boss policies, and that document is linked here on this slide. So we certainly don't expect you all to remember this. That's why it's all written down. Does anyone have any questions about that before I keep going to the other elements, how this differs a bit depending upon project type?
Hi, Lauren, this is Cheryl. I have a question.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hi. So when you say within 90 days of the receipt of the letter, sometimes receipt of the letter of discontinuation of services for the agency is a little difficult and challenging to actually give evidentiary proof that the person has gotten the letter.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
are you measuring that? Are you measuring it
Yeah.
by?
So I mean, we're gonna generally err on the side of trying to help make sure that people have their due process rights respected, right? So, you know, we're not going to be real tight about that. If someone says, "Well, I didn't receive the letter they sent," you should, as an agency, you know, try to have whatever something that is.
Yeah, we do our due diligence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then, you know, if someone's saying, "Well, we didn't get it," or whatever, you know, we're probably gonna hear it. We're probably gonna hear it anyway.
Well, good, because you probably should. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Um. All right. Any other questions folks have? I see someone just raised their hand. Tracy. Hey, Tracy.
Yeah, I actually have a friend that's I want to ask, is CMHA part of that? Like if you had to do the grievance thing, because right now I have a friend who's under their housing program thing, and she says that she believes she's about to be evicted and that the program is
Mm-hmm.
not really helping her right now, but her apartment, like
Mm-hmm.
things need to be fixed in the apartment. Things aren't being fixed. Her house got roaches galore
Mm-hmm.
right now. And
Mm-hmm.
she's at the point where she's like, they're telling me they're going to discontinue her from the program. She's at the point where she's like, I'm just going to buy a tent and stay outside for the summer and try to go
Yeah.
through the process
Tracy,
all
let's
over
maybe.
again.
Yeah. So just quick, so CMHA does receive some CT Boss funds. There's a lot of agencies have a whole bunch of different programs. So I would need to know a lot more to understand, whether or not that program would be subject to this process or not. So
Okay.
what I would say is if you want to just give your friend the email address and the phone number here on this slide,
Okay.
someone on our team would be happy to talk to her and we can help her figure out what, if not the CT Boss grievance process, what other grievance processes may be available to her.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, sure.
I see Kelly has
Kelly.
her hand up.
Yeah.
Hi, so we sent a discharge warning to someone recently. She's incarcerated, but she refused the letter, so it came back to us. It looks like the facility opened it because they review everything, but then she refused it, so it was returned as refused by the post office. So do I count that as received?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can, this is going to happen a lot, right? Where you have no way to get the communication to the person. So you should do everything that you can to possibly, contact that person in whatever means are available to you, and then document the efforts that you made in the person's chart, right? So like if the letter was returned undeliverable, then just put that letter, with that mark in the,
Okay.
with that indication from the post office in the client's file. If there's a way that you can contact her by phone or in other ways to notify her, then you should do that. And if you've done everything that you can, then you've done everything that you can, and that's
Okay.
all you need to do.
That's kind of the reassurance I got from my CAN and director, but it just,
Yeah.
I wish that it was more concrete. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions before we keep going? All right.
Crane has a question.
Hey, thanks.
Crane.
Just a comment. It is super hard when people get incarcerated because I strongly believe innocent until proven guilty. And we know that, the judicial system and sort of there's racism involved. When it's at 90 days, we have to stop the person's, after 90 days of incarceration, we have to stop the person's participation regardless of the situation. I think it's just hard and heartbreaking. And I just want to acknowledge, like, this is really hard work. And I'm really appreciative that we're updating the grievance process. So thanks.
Thanks, Crane, for that. Super important. Thank you. All right. So this next slide talks about how the process is a little bit different for people who are getting rapid rehousing assistance that is funded either by the CT Department of Housing, DOH, or by CT BOSS. So, and the only real difference here is the first step. And it really just formalizes a little bit what I said before, right? Everyone wants to make sure that when people who are getting services are dissatisfied with those services, that we, try as best we can, as quickly as we can to make that right? So, so for the rapid rehousing projects, the first step is going to be that they fill out this form that DOH has created. It's called the Participant Concern Form. And if they need help filling it out, someone at the agency where they are getting the services will help them to fill it out. And that they give that form to the agency that is providing their services. And the intent here really is to, to resolve it between the client and the case manager, or the case manager supervisor, if necessary, so that the person is satisfied with the services that they're getting without having to escalate it to a formal grievance process. So that's the first step for anyone that's getting, again, rapid rehousing funded by DOH or CT BOSS. If that is unsuccessful and the person is still unhappy with the services and wants to proceed with a grievance, then they would follow the process that I outlined on the last slide for the CT BOSS grievance process. So it's the same process. They go first through the formal grievance process at the rapid rehousing provider agency. If they remain dissatisfied, it goes to the CT BOSS grievance committee, and if they remain dissatisfied with the decision by the grievance committee, then they can appeal to the CT BOSS chairs as the final step. I think I forgot to say this on the last slide. That final review by the CT BOSS chairs is the final review, right? So there's no other step available to them through CT BOSS after the chair's review. So this process for rapid rehousing is clearly laid out in the DOH Rapid Rehousing Operations Guide, which is linked in, all the timeframes and whatnot are clearly laid out in that operations guide. One thing that I wanted to say is that both DOH and DEMIS require that nonprofit agencies who are contracted by them have a person on staff who is designated as the person to shepherd grievances through your own agency's grievance process. So I think DEMIS usually calls that the client rights officer, and DOH calls that the grievance liaison, right? But it's the same thing, basically. It's a person who is responsible for knowing what the grievance process is and for helping someone who wants to file a grievance to navigate that process. So we think that that's a best practice for all agencies. So even if you're not a DEMIS or a DOH subcontractor, if your agency doesn't already have somebody designated to that role, we definitely encourage you. To do that. So that person, for example, might be the person who helps somebody to fill out this participant concern form. If the person is not comfortable doing that on their own, or maybe doesn't have the literacy level necessary to do that on their own. So, okay. So then I said earlier that that DEMIS, right, has their own grievance process. So if your project is a permanent supportive housing project and your nonprofit agency is the direct recipient of the COC funds, right? So you have a grant agreement directly with HUD and you draw down those funds directly in ELOCs from HUD, then your project would follow the CT BOSS grievance policy that we just went through, not the DEMIS policy, right? If your permanent supportive housing project is a DEMIS project, meaning that the grant agreement is between DEMIS and HUD, Demas is the one that is drawing down the money in ELACs, and you are contracted by Demas to, usually provide services, maybe also do rental assistance administration for that project. Then you would follow the Demas grievance process, and it's pretty similar in some ways to the CT BOSS process. So the first step in that process is that someone completes an informal conference request form. That form is linked on this slide, and that form gets submitted either to the local coordinated access network, and the contacts for the local CANs are linked on this slide, or the person can also give the request form to the agency that is providing them with the housing assistance, and that agency will pass that along to the CAN. So the CAN will then convene an informal conference that will occur within 30 days. And again, like with the CT BOSS process, the person has the right to have an attorney or another advocate present, and the CAN will give them a written notice with their decision within 15 days of the conference. So if the person remains dissatisfied with that informal conference, then they can submit a formal hearing request form to Alice Minervino. Alice's is with Demas, Alice's address is here. That hearing will occur within 30 days of receipt of and when I'm saying 30 days, but all of these I think are working days in the Demas policy, so it's 30 working days. And then they'll convene that within 30 days of receiving the request, and they will issue a written decision to the person who made who filed the grievance within 10 working days of convening the hearing. And then finally, if the person still remains dissatisfied, they will get in the notice from step number 2 instructions on how to submit a request for a final review. That final review will happen within 15 working days of making the request, and the participant will receive written notice with the results of the final review within 15 working days as well. And all of these steps and the processes and the timelines and all of the details are laid out in the Demas COC rental assistance operating guide, which is linked on the slide. And I think we have a question from Crane.
Hey, thanks, Lauren. Just a comment. I'm a consumer rights grievance officer, and at Capital Region we have 3. A larger organization is a great idea to have some diversity among your grievance officers. So we have representation of people who are Spanish speaking, queer, Black, and all different levels of the organization, and white folks. So we have that array, which is, if you can do it in your agency, that's awesome. But for agencies that can't do it, or if you're receiving Demas funds and you need assistance around a grievance, you can also contact our grievance officers to give a hand. Sometimes there's just a conflict. If a grievance comes to me, like I'm the Spanish speaking person, but not bicultural, but if someone comes and it's a housing issue, I can't hear that grievance. So we look to each other for help. So just want to remind folks to be in community with each other. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Crane, for that. So Crane pointed out something super important, which is that, we at CT BOSS will always make sure that the folks involved in hearing grievances are not conflicted, right? So, so somebody who was involved, who works for the agency, for example, that the grievance is about, would never be serving on the grievance committee. And similarly at your agency, and this is a HUD requirement, right? You've got to make sure that anybody who is making a decision, hearing the appeal in a grievance, is not somebody who was originally involved in making the decision or a subordinate to the person who made the decision. So you want to make sure that your grievance policy is free of conflicts of interest, not just your policy, but your actual process when grievances occur are free of conflicts of interest. And if you ever have conflicts of interest, can be confusing and tricky and whatever. So if you ever have questions and want us to weigh in on whether or not something constitutes a conflict of interest, we are always happy. We are always happy on our team to do that. And we'll look, the final slide is the contact information for our team to make sure that you've got that information and can reach us. So, okay. So other questions before I move on? All right. So, you know, we can have the best grievance process in the world, right? Which I'm sure we don't. I'm sure we will continue to learn and continue to make that better and better. But even if we had, you know, a phenomenal process, right? The process doesn't help anyone if they don't know about it. So this is a new requirement that was adopted by the steering committee in January of 2023. And we now have a policy in CT BOSS that says that if your project gets funding from CT BOSS, as well as our coordinated access networks that are located in CT BOSS, which are basically all of the CANs except for the Fairfield County CAN, are required when somebody applies for assistance, when they enter a project, and for funded projects, at least at a minimum, at least annually, which is normally people are going to do that at recertification, that you provide your participants or applicants in the case of a CAN with a notice that summarizes folks' grievance rights, and that notice is now available in English and in Spanish and is linked here on this slide. So you've got to provide the notice at each of those times upon application, at project entry, and then the minimum at a minimum annually. And then, but you don't want to just, you know, you don't want to just give them the notice and like in a, you know, stack of paperwork and that's it, right? Like it's about really making sure that people understand that they've got a, that they've got the right to file a grievance, and that they understand, you know, how that process works and what they can expect if they were to do that. And so you do want to take time to go over that notice with people. And I also think like when people are, you know, have a concern and you're not able to resolve that concern with them, that is also a good time to make sure that they understand what their grievance rights are, so that we're constantly educating people about their due process rights and really supporting them to use those due process rights, and making sure that they know that there's no, like I said earlier, not going to be anything, any kind of retaliation that happens if they file a grievance, that you really value the same way that we value their right to file a grievance, and how important it is for all of our organizations, the learning that can come out of grievances for all of our organizations, that we're really encouraging people to exercise those rights. Oh, sorry, I got behind on my slide. So this is the slide that I just did. With the notes to the, with the links to the grievance notice in English and in Spanish. And then this is the slide that we're on now. So, you know, one of the things that we did in the latest revision of the grievance policy is we streamlined it a little bit to make it a little simpler. We realized that it was very hard to follow the way that it was before. And that there were some places where there was conflicting information across different policy documents. And so we did really try the best we could to streamline it and make it as simple as possible. But we also recognize that it's still, as all things are, I feel like it's still a little complicated. And that's really because the different funders have these slightly different requirements. So we did the best we could. But we know the process is still a little bit complicated. And so we are always available, the HI team, if you're not sure or one of your participants isn't sure which process applies to them, what options they might have, we're always available to consult and answer any questions that you have. So please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team if we can help on this or really on any other matter. And so this last slide is our contact information. So you've got contact information for myself and for Liz, as well as for all the other folks that are on our core CT Boss team, as well as the generic CT Boss Gmail address. So that's it. That's all we had for you guys today. Does anyone have any questions that we didn't already answer?
Not seeing anything. And we've got the slides are in the chat, and they are also posted on the website, and we will send out the recording and the slides also.
All right, we appreciate you all. We appreciate all the work that you do every day to provide high quality services to the folks who are experiencing homelessness or formerly experiencing homelessness in the state of Connecticut. And we know that you guys really care about quality of services and want to provide services in a way that people need and want those services. So thank you for that. And
Hey, Lauren,
Lauren, we've got one
Yeah.
question in the chat.
All right, sure.
Sure. How does the participant and attorney / advocate get access to the records?
So in terms of like the grievance records, right? So we would make anything, that we're reviewing as part of the process transparent to the participant and or the participant's attorney. And we can do that in whatever way works for the participant and the attorney. We can, we would work out the details of like the mechanics of how they would get the access directly with that person and or their attorney. If what you're asking is how does somebody get access to their full like kind of case record that's kept by the agency from which they receive services, that you would do through that agency. So all of the agencies, should have policies and procedures for how participants can access their records. So I would suggest you contact, your case manager or the person who supervises your case manager to find out what the agency protocols are for gaining access to your full case record.
Attorney Cloward is asking to get the full HMIS record.
Say that again?
The attorney wrote the question in the chat, looking to get access to the full HMIS record.
To the full HMIS record. So that I think you would probably want to submit a help desk ticket to the HMIS help desk and figure that out. I don't know the answer to that. We are not the HMIS lead for Connecticut, but I would submit a ticket and then they should be able to answer that question. Thank you, Crane, for clarifying that.
Sure, no problem. Thank you, Lauren and Liz. Appreciate your work.
No, we appreciate you. Thank you, Crane. Anything else? I'm not seeing anything else in the chat or hands raised. Let's see. No, just some thank yous. We thank all of you, like Lauren said, for all the work you're doing.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you all soon.
Take care.
Take good care.